Hello and welcome to Data Talks. I'm Jake Thorne. I'll be your tour guide for today's webcast. We have a stellar lineup of industry experts for you. We'll be talking troubling trends with James Blake, Cohesity's head of Global Cybersecurity and Strategy, and we'll be speaking with Kevin Lomax, Director of Technical Services at Pearl River Community College, where he'll be sharing the tangible steps his organization is taking to keep pace with the rate of change in cybersecurity space. And finally, we'll wrap up with some show and tell with Jonathon Mayer, our very own Director of Security Architecture. There's an awful lot to cover, so let's get right into it. There's a lot of non-tech news out there in the world right now that rightfully demands our attention. However, this webcast today will be focusing on cybersecurity for obvious reasons. So in 2024, cybersecurity landscape has been marked by a significant increase in both the number and sophistication of cyber attacks. Notably, there was a 30% rise in global cybersecurity during the second quarter of 2024. That's a highest increase observed in years. Despite the fact that Gartner anticipates global spend on cybersecurity and risk management to be $215 billion with a B in 2024, marking a 14% increase from 2023. The global average cost of a data breach in 2024 was $4.88 million, which is a 10% increase. So if you take all of that math and you start to put it together, what we're saying is attacks are on the rise, but outpacing our spend. And also, our spend is being outpaced by the total number of what people are able to derive in their criminal activities. So we've got to figure out whatever it is we're doing is not stemming the tide. So what do they attribute these things to? Human error as a primary vulnerability accounts for 88%. Cybersecurity breaches were attributed to human error, the implementation of what essentially are worst practices, underscoring the critical need for comprehensive security and training and awareness programs. Thanks for being on the webcast today. Kind of underscores the point. The evolving threat landscape, the rise in sophisticated attacks, including those leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, that translates to essentially autonomous attacks at scale. Automated vulnerability scanning can be used both offensively and defensively, of course, but offensively, the conversion rate doesn't have to be as high to be effective. And then exploiting public-facing applications. Attackers continue to target vulnerabilities online and service applications. Many of these attacks enable privilege escalations to allow for lateral movement across the network, increasing potential impact. Then there's the perspective from the security practitioners themselves. What's that perspective look like? Well, there's a couple of trends that you're probably already aware of. Just mentioned earlier, AI on both sides of the fence, offensive and defensive. And we're going to get to unpacking some of that in a moment. But then there's also this term about clean rooms, which you're probably hearing not just from analysts, but almost every vendor in the space. What is a clean room? How do you set one up? What goes in one? How do you create it? What are the dependencies to having them at the ready? So we're going to try to unpack some of that too. And so now I'd like to bring in our first guest. I'd like to bring in James Blake, Cohesity's global strategist in cyber resilience. James brings decades of operations and experience in the roles such as global director for cybersecurity risk at JPMorgan Chase. He's also the co-founder and the second largest security conference in the UK. James Blake, welcome to the webcast. It's really great to have you here. And just for our audience sake, although we do have similar appearances, we are not related, and you can confirm that, correct?
Yeah, we have the same house right there, but yeah.
It's really great having you on. And despite those terrible headlines, is there something that you think we should be considering in terms of how to frame up these topics to make them bite-sized or actionable when we take them into our own environments? How should we frame it?
Yeah, I think there's three parts to it, clearly. So the first one is we need to be threat-led, right? So we need to be led by the attacks. And as you've seen, adversaries are changing their behavior, right? They're moving from purely phishing into doing things like reusing credentials, which is why multi-factor authentication is so important, but targeting vulnerabilities. Just look at last Patch Tuesday. By the Saturday, they had exploits. Patch Tuesday, exploits Saturday. So that's the first thing, be threat-led, attack-led. Second thing is we need to think about the tools we need, but the thing that should drive the tools we need is the operational outcomes, the processes we need to build on top of those tools. Because there's an awful lot of people shilling tools, but there are not many people that are enabling operational processes. And that's what we should use to drive our choice of tools.
That's very helpful to break it into those buckets. So are people over-rotating on one or another and thinking that one of those three is going to get them all of the panacea they were looking for? I hear people talking about AI a lot on sort of both sides of the equation, as was referenced in the news stories. Is that the panacea everyone thinks it's going to be?
I think, you look at the Gartner hype cycle, right? I think the trough of disillusionment is incoming on AI. And I say that as a man, 20 years I've been building security operations centers or leading SOC functions for some of the largest companies in the world. And I've heard for years, we're going to get rid of the analyst, right? And when I go back to my days at university, I spent 8 years at university getting certifications in machine learning, which I originally used in intelligence analysis. We haven't got rid of the intelligence analyst, right? So I think AI, in the context of the constantly changing adversary that can change tactics all the time, it is a force multiplier. It's going to enable us to do more. Is it going to totally eliminate the need to insert humans at certain decision points during something like cyber incident response? No. I think there's always going to be humans there. It's just the reality of dealing with a constantly changing adversary and very complicated environments that we operate within.
So let me double click on that. So with the notion that we're going to have AI do things autonomously, auto-magically, having them on the front end would pose different opportunities than having them in the response capabilities. So you're saying there's going to be a slightly different way, at least short term, in how we should be thinking about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at the function of AI within things like incident detection, right, it's very, very good. AI is really good at classification, right? That's one of the things that it does. Its classification is the things that power the large language models we're using to create content at the moment. And it's the foundation of most machine learning. And also, things like linear regression and typical statistical techniques to look for deviations over time. These are all things that we've had in detection for years. And they have a huge amount of function. If you just look at our multivariate anomaly detection model, which is able to find encryption, wiper attacks, even malicious insiders, right? That's based on that kind of technology. I think the difference is when we start to look at something like an incident, and if you look at what an incident is formed of, it's typically the 14 stages of MITRE attack, right? The first two, we can't really do anything about, the weaponization of resource development and reconnaissance because it's very noisy. The last 12 are the things we can really do something about. And it's the last two that have impact, exfiltration of data and impact where we encrypt or wipe. And if we can handle incidents in those 10 stages in the middle, there's no impact on the business, no confidentiality, integrity, or availability is lost. But it's where you get people that think when there is impact, right, we are going to run the entire incident from a single console, from a single vendor's product, and we're going to handle the whole thing end to end. And I used to work for a SOAR vendor for a little while before I came to Cohesity, and even we were honest. We're like, our product integrates with all your security stack. You can't run an incident just from us, right? There's that reality. So I think this idea that we're only going to look at encrypted systems, right? That's not the interesting part in a ransomware incident. It's the last 15, 20 minutes, an hour of a ransomware attack. It's the 4 days before. How did they get in? What persistence mechanisms have they got? How have they evaded our controls? I need to understand that, because if I recover without patching, without removing those artifacts or bolstering my controls, I'm just going to get hit again. And I think there's an incredible desire to create a click button, which to sell easily, but isn't reality of incident response. Hey, I have no hair because I did incident response for 20 years.
That's I can relate, but that's not how I lost mine. But I just want to close on one thought, because you're actually pivoting over nicely to to process, which I do want to follow up with. But just to close the book on this thinking around AI. So when I was thinking front end, I'm thinking the type of exercises you might do beyond your tabletop that could help find your own vulnerabilities. There's lots of avenues for AI in that space. But in the response space, you're saying there's a lot of very hands-on. They can help with the thinking through these things and the identification, but it's still very methodical process that's required, even if you're using, as you probably should, these AI accelerators. Did I say that correctly?
Absolutely. Sorry, I said in a very long way, but you proceeded very nicely there. Absolutely. It's, the AI models are force multipliers at each stage of that investigation. So triage, investigation, which may involve forensics, it may involve hunting, it may involve deploying things into sandboxes to understand the malicious actions of a binary, for instance. AI has power in all of these, but the thread that runs through it is the workflow. The thread that runs through it is the analyst or the reverse engineer, and all of these handoff points of security. And then it gets even more complicated when you've got retained incident responders that aren't a part of your organization that are in there. So what we need to do is build those workflows, that shared responsibility model. And then when you think about it, security investigating the incident, but it's IT that's actually mitigating it. And I'm starting to talk about process again.
No, that's great.
This guy.
We want to go there. And we were talking about this term at the top of the news line there, where for me, I'm trying to follow these terms. It's almost like keeping up with a junior high kid, Riz, mid, cap, I don't know. And now clean room, it's the same kind of challenges we have. The security terminology is often changing, and we're bringing our legacy thinking to these new terms. You want to talk process, I want to talk process. How do these things fit with each other in terms of what this really means, especially clean room as a term?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I'm a hardcore SecOps guy, right? So spent 10 years building SOCs and quite a lot investigating incidents. Some quite famous ones. And so to me, a clean room means a very discrete thing, right? As retained incident response companies, when I was at HP Enterprise running one of the consulting practices there, we knew what a clean room was. And then you think about all these other partners out there, people like, Palo Alto Unit 42, Cisco Talos, and things like that. They have a very discrete meaning of a clean room, and it is an isolated environment in which we not only recover, but we are also able to investigate the incident and mitigate the threats, right? And so that process, where we do triage, we do containment, we do investigation, we do mitigation, then we do recovery.
You're going to have to explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader, right? So is it a physical space? Is it a virtual space? Is it I imagine that thing in the movie Alien where they bring the monster into the room and then they lock it in the airlock. What are we physically talking about?
Yeah, so the thing about clean rooms is there is not one size that fits all, and this is a part of the challenge, right? So people have tried to productize clean room in its entirety end to end, forcing customers down something that might not fit with their level of maturity, with the way they operate, their structure, their tooling, and things like this, right? So the easiest way to do it is to dumb down clean room so there's something nice and simple that you can press a button and it does one thing. But the reality is those of us that come from incident response, it's not delivering actually what we need. So from a Cohesity perspective, what we've tried to do is deliver that best practice workflow, right, that you need. You need that containment, you need that investigation, you need that mitigation, and you need that recovery, right? But being able to deploy that with architectures that are flexible enough to handle both that best practice and each customer's environment in a way that suits them. So there's two ways to go. Either dumb it down and try and create a one-size-fits-all, which isn't really appropriate for 80% of the businesses you're talking to, organizations. Or you can go, we're going to do that force multiplication all the way through the stages, and give you a framework for those stages with the flexibility for you to have an architecture that suits your environment.
So let me play this back. In the context of a response, I'm going to have to create, restore from some other place a clean room.
Mm-hmm.
How do I think about what needs to be in it, or what do I need to be able to make that if my systems have been compromised? Where does that come from? Where does the stuff that I need to make that space come from?
Well, I think if you look at the clean room best practice methodologies, you largely have 4 stages involved in it, right? So you need to prepare in advance. The thing that differentiates organizations that have minimal impacts after cyber events from the ones that have large impacts are their level of preparedness, right? The processes, the skills in people, the testing that, but also the environments, right? So if I go in to create a clean room after an incident, the last time you want to do that is during an incident, right? Like going in and asking someone, have you got, 3 switches and 5 servers available? No, because my CMDB is completely down and I don't know where any of my resources are because it's been encrypted or wiped. So the first stage is understanding what you need, what we call a digital jump bag. And that is, what do I need to handle that incident? And that is not anything to do with recovery, right? Forget your business services and functions. When I was at Saudi Aramco, we couldn't get in the building. We couldn't bring our insurance company, right? All of these things that were happening because the very tools we need to communicate to insurers, law enforcement, regulators, impacted data subjects, they're hit by the ransomware incident. And then I look at most tabletop exercises organizations do, or their business impact analysis, they even think about this scorched earth policy. So we need things like the ability to gain access to buildings, communicate, contact lists, our contracts with retained incident responders, our cyber insurance policies, all of these things, as well as the ability to get ourselves up to a trusted state. That's in your digital jump bag.
Yeah, that's really good insights. And I could spend another 2 hours trying to gain these very useful tips. And it certainly elevates the conversation. James, thank you so much for making time for us. I'd like to bring in our next guest. Thanks, James. Take care. A key element of this series is to provide you the perspective of security and IT peers. And that's why I'm excited to introduce our next guest. Kevin Lomax is the Director of Technical Services at Pearl River College, Community College, the 4th largest community college in the state of Mississippi. Kevin brings some 17 years of IT experience to the table, has a long bio of certifications and accomplishments, but one I wanted to make sure I included today. Kevin is a Purple Heart and Bronze Star awardee from the United States Army. And with Veterans Day coming up on Monday, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for being on, Kevin.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I definitely am excited to be here and have this talk with you today about data talks.
Thank you. So just to help us get to pace here, how would you explain to our audience sort of what your team is responsible for and the different organizations you support within the broader organization?
So my team, we're responsible for all the security, the firewalls, the SIEM/SOC solutions, DNS security, all the networking, the systems applications, and most importantly, probably is the backups, making sure our backups are done routinely, that the ones we have encrypted that are out there that we're testing on, making sure we can back up from them. And then we have 3 different campuses, so we're spread out pretty much about a 60, 70 mile radius that my team and I cover.
Excellent. So in James's conversation, he broke it down into sort of 3 buckets of thinking. One around the attack trends themselves, the tooling that might be involved from different vendors that you pull into your environment. And then, of course, the process is where we wanted to spend a bit more of the time is how do all these things relate and play together nicely? Is this how you think about breaking out things when you're putting your exercises together?
Absolutely. And attack trends, they, just like James talked about, they're changing every day. So it's how do you remain relevant? How do you try to, what different tools and access do you have to kind of see what's going on and just stay ahead of it the best you can? Insider attacks, that's huge. he talked about MFA as well. MFA fatiguing. That's become, MFA will be a thing of the past before long. It'll be easy to get through that. So, and then just the phishing emails, with AI, the sophistication of these emails. I mean, it used to be easy to look at an email and say, oh, that's definitely a phishing email. Now you got to do a little work to see it. So it's not only seeing it, but educating your users to kind of be able to identify that as well.
That's good insights. So I don't know if you use the term tabletop exercise, but if you do, when describing the roles and the tests and the plans that you work through in that response, do you also, in those exercises that you may do you go through the exercise of creating what we had just described as a clean room? And how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I think tabletop, in my opinion, tabletop exercises probably are a key element to help you build your clean room and know what you need in your clean room. Because a lot of times you can sit here and you can look at all these processes and look at everything you think you need. And kind of like James said, it's not a one size fits all clean room. I mean, there's larger organizations, they're going to need a lot more different things, whereas smaller organizations may not. But the tabletop exercise, when you're running through it, when you're going live, you're trying to be able to not only mitigate the attack, you're trying to figure out what happened. You're trying to, get back. I know recovery is one of the later phases, but in the business, recovery is always a big piece because nobody wants to be down and lose money. So kind of just those live events and seeing the things you need as you're doing that definitely helps you build your clean room. And those tabletop exercises, you got to know who to notify. When things are happening quick, fast, and in a hurry, everybody wants to just kind of hunker down. You got to be confident in what you do and make sure you have confidence in your team and that they can roll through that and hit those steps just like you prepare for every day.
So that is a really good way to think about the way these pieces are connected. But for myself, I'm trying to think of it in a literal sense, like building a Lego Death Star here. Where is your data? Where are you pulling it down from to create and I say pull it down from just metaphorically, it could be anywhere, but where is that, the essence of the building blocks for your clean room? Where do you keep that? And what's your process for creating those?
So our clean room, we actually have a DR site that is not on our main campus, that we've tried to make sure that we have maybe an older server that we can spin up. Just things that may not be in the network, that may not need that support and maintenance day to day, but is running, and you're making sure it's operating, not plugged up to the network, that if something happens that you can use to pull your, as for us, we back up to Fort Knox. I mean, that's
perfect.
That's one of the first things when we had, or have ever noticed anything, the first thing we're like, backups. You've got to be able to get to your backups, and you got to have confidence in those backups, knowing that they're going to work. So, in our clean room, that's a big piece of it, is that, and having, you got to make sure you can get in the building, obviously, first, but then being able to have a little dedicated space, because you want to know how did they get in? Because if you don't know how they got in, it's going to be hard to stop them from coming back. And if they get you once, they're going to try and get you again for sure.
So when you're pulling down from Fort Knox in that space, and you're going to assemble those pieces, you've done this in drills post tabletop. So it's tabletop, you design it, then you drill it. Do you actually rehearse this, and have you taken new snapshots of what you've been able to rebuild from what you pulled down from Fort Knox? Is that how the process works for you?
Absolutely. We do it just like it was a live event. We pull in all our backups. We make sure everything's back running. We actually have even, made sure that all the licensing, that's a big piece that you got to think about, because everything now is subscription based. It's licensed. You got to get licenses. You have to get a hold of, if you have a SIM-SOC solution, you got to get a hold of them. You got to make sure we're a small team. So, that SIM and that SOC, that's the eyes and the ears that keep us going. They let us know when we have these anomalies and things like James talked about 4 days. We're hoping at 1 minute that SIM has notified someone that's not supposed to be in our network, sniffing around in there, and the SOC's calling us, letting us know, hey, what's going on here? And we can start looking into that, because they're in their days, if not weeks, if not months before, and they just wait until that human error, or someone just lets them in that door.
Yeah. So it's also my understanding, and correct me if I have this wrong, but that you sit on a statewide committee to share and improve best practices across the sector. Is this something that comes up? This, first of all, the notion of clean rooms, or the conversation about what should be in them, or these types of strategies, is this being shared, and what's some of the insights that are gleaned there?
Absolutely. So it's the Mississippi Cybersecurity Initiative, and it's
Excellent.
just like the trends in ransomware and cyber attacks. It has started to grow more and more, and the facilities being built, tabletop exercises. There's some more scheduled after the first of the year to continue to kind of refine those skills and talk about lessons learned, and just bringing people across the state together, trying to get, if nothing else, it's all about letting people know. I've always said that. Don't be ashamed to tell people if you have an incident, because do you really want someone else to get hit by that same thing? That's a bad feeling. So you talk about it, make sure that you lessons learned, help your buddies out around the state, around the country. So,
yeah,
but they definitely, tabletops, it's kind of surprising that clean rooms really weren't a thing for most of the time. And Mississippi we've been a little bit behind on things, but we're coming around, and it's just getting people that may not know some of these cybersecurity tactics, how to respond, how to recover, just trying to get them involved in this, and kind of the big one team, one fight is the approach that this is going.
So for people who don't have the benefit of sitting on your committee, or for people who think that, hey, I've got my virtual air gap and it's out there somewhere, and it could be anywhere, and I've got this instant restore button, and James talked about the one button approach. What do you think they might be missing, or a gap that they could surprise them in the heat of the moment? Where do you think they're going to struggle with that notion?
I think they're definitely going to struggle, and that's if you don't know about if you don't have something air gapped, that's something you better look at real quick. And some of the big things, the tools are out there. There's a lot of free stuff out there, vulnerability scans, penetration testing tools. That's things they need to be looking at to just see. That's basic stuff to see how vulnerable you are and kind of catch some of that stuff. But that's the good thing about this cybersecurity initiative, is that's what it's trying to bring everybody together to try and give them that information, get the knowledge out there so that they can understand what air gapped is if they don't know what it is, and make sure that they're finding some type of solution, whether it's a on-prem air gapped device that they unplug the network from after they do a backup real quick, or definitely like us. I mean, at Fort Knox, for us, that was just a no-brainer. Knowing the security and having all the anomaly based and immutable, and that's, you got to have confidence in your backups for sure.
But it sounds like what you're also saying is air gap is table stakes. You got to have that. But what you put in it, the things you were mentioning earlier, that's actually the critical component that's going to help you create your clean room when the heat is on. Do I have that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Kevin. These are tremendous insights, and I really do appreciate you being on. It's invaluable to have your perspective here. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And now it's about this time in the webcast when I know some of you may have to drop for other commitments, and I get that. But before you do, I want to stress that there's one thing coming up in this next demo I think is truly beneficial to you and your organization, which is how do you actually set up one of these clean rooms? And for that, I'd like to welcome Jonathon Mayer, Director of Security Architecture here at Cohesity. Welcome, Jonathon. We've heard the backstory on this, the threats, and we've heard from a customer from their perspective. And now it would be great if you could show us what this might actually look like if we were to watch this, say, streamed on Twitch, per se. So welcome. Can you do that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is a lot to take in all at once. So we totally understand if people need to kind of step away and let it soak in a little bit. James covered the theory really, really well. He's got a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And then Kevin followed that up really nicely with the practical outlook of just, how these things come together in real life. And so what we're going to do now is just walk through so that you can envision how to actually implement some of these concepts. I think Kevin made a great point about, it's more about having some fluidity and being able to deliver these kinds of outcomes. So take a look. We've talked about, the key outcomes for our preparation phase are to have this digital jump bag, to protect it and replicate it so that it follows the 321 plus protection status. And so to do that, New York City 01 is our primary location here. What that means is we're going to have it initially created on a Cohesity cluster here. And from there, we'll be able to protect it locally and then replicate it, whether that's to just a secondary cluster or even an isolated vault. And then in our case here, we've also got it pushed up into Fort Knox. So that absolutely adheres to the 321 plus objectives, our strategy. And so we can also see here that our replica copy is stored in US Cal 01. And so to see what the contents are, let's go over to where we would most likely use it and take a look at it from there. So it makes it very simple to go into the recovery workflow, and I can very easily pull up the system and browse our protection group so that I can see exactly what's inside it. And in this case, I have my incident response playbook, and these things they're going to be maintained as part of the general operational readiness strategy. And that involves taking those file hashes and making sure that they're captured somewhere out, elsewhere, likely in the physical jump bag. But this ensures, going back to those outcomes, that we now have seen what preparation looks like, and we've got our digital jump bag ready to go, and we can very quickly and easily validate that it exists in multiple places, adhering to that 321 plus protection methodology. So now that we're prepared, we are ready for the unfortunate occurrence of an actual destructive cyber attack. And as we can see, the initiation phase is really more of a discovery and a validation effort that supports the later investigation portion of the environment. The key thing here is that these are very much led by security, but they also are heavily supported by the operations side. So to take a closer look at that from a Cohesity perspective, what that means is operationally, the first thing we need to do is validate that this is actually an attack, as opposed to just a standard operational outage. And so very quickly, by looking in the anti-ransomware dashboard, we can see in this case, we've got a lot of localized impact to a single site. That was our, one of our primary sites. And so I can work with my network team. We're going to isolate that so that we can ideally contain the threat. But just like we talked about having isolation and 321 plus, one of the key things there is administrative isolation to these assets that we might be needing, because we want to make sure that if our authentication mechanism has been compromised, that it doesn't have an ability to compromise the assets that we're going to need to recover from. So in this case, my minimum viable response capability, these are the things that I'm going to have to use to build up the clean room in the first place. So think authentication, name services, time, communication, security tooling, core security tooling. So in this case, I can see right away that I've protected them locally in New York City, but then I've also got them replicated out to my secondary site, again, with the administrative isolation, and then to Fort Knox. So a whole nother level of both offsite, out of the environment completely, and administratively isolated. And so what that means is that in this case, I've just had to take my New York side offline So we're going to switch over to California and start bringing things back up. And so I need to get this initial piece in place first. And because I can see that things appear to be isolated on the New York side, we can start with the California side, and start bringing that thing up. And what that means is we're going to go ahead and put this in its own clean room, so that we can start supporting, this will ultimately, like we've talked about, it will become the pieces that allow the investigation to actually take place. And so we're going to go ahead and get these things going. If for whatever reason we determine that these are not trusted, that's why we have our digital jump bag, because we still have the ability to build these things up cleanly if it comes to that. So we've given ourselves multiple paths to success. So while that's coming up, we'll come back over here and let's take a closer look at what's exactly going on. I still have access to all the data even when the whole site is offline, because these are copies that I've taken. So I'm going to take a closer look here, and just I have a strong suspicion this is indeed a cyber attack, but let's go ahead and validate so we can see all the different metrics in the signals. So entropy and deletions, adds, changes, those all align to an encryption event. And sure enough, with these file extension changes, we feel very confident at this point that that's exactly what we're dealing with. So the fact that we've already got our clean room coming up and our isolated vault, that was the right move, and we're moving very quickly to take it the next step and really to get prepared, to be ready for this investigation. Let's also confirm what kind of data has already been impacted. In this case, I've got a credit card. So, that's oftentimes falls under some sort of regulatory requirement. So there's going to be a notification, generally within a pretty narrow time window or time frame. So I'm going to need that right there is a signal that I'm needing to engage other parts of my incident response team, get them involved. Maybe legal's involved at this point. There's different groups depending on what unfolds as the attack and the investigation take place. And then also equally important is I can see other things in the environment that an attacker may use to further their impact or access in the environment. So passwords, tokens, things like that, product keys. These are all digital artifacts that an attacker could use against me. So that's going to be important. As we move into the investigation phase, I've also got good information here with the threats, but we're going to touch on that here in a second. The important part of the initiate phase is really just to make sure that we, validate that this was indeed a cyber attack, and to make sure that we've got those dial tune services ready to go so that our minimum viable response capability is up and running. Now we're ready to get into the real heart of the response, which is this investigation phase. This is where we learn how do we navigate remediating and eradicating the threat so that we can get everything back online. We saw that we had gotten some hits on our automatic threat scan, and that's very fortunate for us. So we can also come over here and immediately jump into a deeper analysis using validated tool like VirusTotal, and I can start looking more closely at this behavior. Now, understand this was an impacted system. I'm also very interested in the systems that were not impacted, because there's a good chance that those, one of them is being used for persistence. And so the faster I can identify the full scope of what's going on, the better off we are. if you remember when we were looking through the different signals that we were getting out of that anomaly dashboard, files written, files deleted, there were quite a few. And so the fact that I can come in here and identify, okay, Akira_readme, that's a pretty noticeable file that was written. So let's go back over to our impacted site here, NYCO2, and let's take advantage of our global search and see if there are some other systems that may be impacted that just haven't alerted yet. And sure enough, I've got one right here, NYCO 043. So what that allows me to do is I can flag that one. That is now part of the scope of the investigation, and I can hand that off to, I can present data from it, specific files, an entire volume. I can bring that whole system back up in the clean room and hand that off to one of the investigators to get a closer look. Another thing that we're going to want to focus on, similar to that, is Active Directory, right? Because we understand that Active Directory gets compromised or attacked, any authentication service, whether it's your security, SSO provider, MFA. So we're going to hop over here to our clean room. And mind you, we had to isolate that California site. So we're able to gather all of this intelligence even when the primary environment is offline. So that is a key benefit of using the backup platform in this way and having this level of access to the data that's there. So back to our Active Directory here, we've been protecting it. And so one of the key capabilities when we protect Active Directory is that we're going to compare the copies we've got with the live directory. And so we can look right here and we can see immediately that one of the default, one of the domain policies has been changed. And so if I scroll down, I can even see when that happened. So more information that I'm putting into my manifest here, my investigation, I now have a much clearer understanding of the actual time frame of interest for activities in this environment. And so if I know that somebody's been in there here in the past several hours, it looks like I'm in a good place because I'm moving quickly enough and things haven't been lurking around for too long. I'm also going to look at the users, get a closer look at what's going on there. Sure enough, my domain admins, we have a pretty benign looking user that's been added here. But as I am building out the incident report, these are all really important details to hand off to my operations team, because remember, earlier we were talking about this investigation is very much led by the security team, but it also is supported, heavily by the operations team. And as we get into these mitigation type efforts here in the next phase, the operations team is really going to take over and step into the lead. So having these kinds of details are really important for them to be able to take the correct action. And then finally, the most important thing is, as I'm gathering all of this different information, I need a secure place to put it. And so as an investigator, having my, warm locked file system ready and available here in the clean room, I now have a place that I can take these pieces of evidence and save them in a way that the chain of custody is maintained. And again, it's operationally efficient. It's able to be replicated, protected, sent out to a vault so that I can ensure that it maintains its integrity. But most importantly, this is all part of my backup infrastructure in the first place. So it's from a financial standpoint, it's also very advantageous because it's not costing me anything additional. But we can see it's got a tremendous value here. So now that I've got the right information that I can hand off to my operations team, I've got that incident report ready to go, and I'm going to hand it off to my ops team so that they can begin the staging process and start bringing things back up. Awesome. So hopefully that helped you really to understand what it looks like to get through at least the early phases of an incident response. The preparation is absolutely key. As part of our cyber event response team, that absolutely makes and breaks the success of handling one of these types of incidents. And then, we focus today on the aspects that were really driven by the security, so that initiate and investigate phase. And then as we move into the mitigate phase, that's run by the operations team generally, that starts to feel much, much more normal, right? You're bringing systems back on, you're taking the patching recommendations from the investigation, maybe adding in some additional controls, those kinds of things, and then final backup to get a good clean system and put it into recover it into production, and away you go. Thanks so much.
Hey, I really do appreciate your time. Thanks for letting me coerce you into providing yet another fantastic demo for us. So it's a great use of our time. Can't say for yours, but really appreciate you being on. So thanks very much, Jonathon. So today's episode, of course, just scratches the surface. And so if you wish to continue exploring, we've got a few links in the chat for you. One I'd like to call out in specific is a recommendation for our white paper called Building Cyber Resilience in a World of Destructive Cyber Attacks. That link is there in the chat. I'd also like to invite you to join us on December 11th for an insightful panel discussion where we'll be delving into how enhanced collaboration in response and recovery can bolster resilience and mitigate the impact of an attack. So keep an eye out for that email invitation. Thanks to all our guests, and please do take a moment and do that survey for us, because surveys help hold us accountable to what hopefully you need and find useful in these webcasts. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in future Cohesity events.